Looking back now, I realize that the moment my world began to crumble wasn't when I discovered the affair, or even when I learned about the embezzlement. It was earlier, much earlier on that September morning, when I chose to trust my instincts instead of my husband's reassurances. I was 31 years old, had been married for 7 years, and believed I understood the rhythm of my life. How foolish that seems now. The call came while I was in Paris, attending what should have been the culmination of months of careful planning for Sterling Holdings' European expansion. I had worked 18-hour days to make that trip possible, coordinating with investors, architects, and city planners across 3 countries. But when Christopher's voice came through the phone, casual and warm, something inside me went cold. "Having fun, darling. Take your time. No need to rush back." 7 years of marriage had taught me to read the spaces between Christopher's words. He was always most considerate when he was hiding something. It was like watching someone arrange flowers while planning to deliver devastating news, beautiful on the surface but with an undercurrent of wrongness that made my skin crawl. I ended the call and stood in my suite at the Georges Fives, staring out at the Champs-Élysées without seeing it. My hands were shaking and I couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was the way he'd said, "Take your time," too casual, too encouraging. Christopher had always been possessive of my attention even when he pretended otherwise. The flight back to New York felt endless. I kept replaying our conversation, searching for clues I might have missed. When had he started speaking to me like I was a casual acquaintance instead of his wife? When had his "I love you" become an automatic response rather than a feeling? Miguel met me at JFK, his weathered face showing surprise at my early return. He'd been our driver for 15 years, had seen me through my father's heart attack, my miscarriages, the dark months when I thought I might never be whole again. He never asked questions, but his eyes held concern as he loaded my luggage. "Home, Mrs. Sterling." I almost said yes. Almost let myself believe that whatever was wrong could be fixed with conversation, with effort, with love. Instead, I heard myself say, "Just drop me at the gates. I'll walk from there." The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves, and something else, something that didn't belong. As I approached our house, that wrongness intensified. There were lights on in the second floor, in the room we'd designated as a nursery after our first year of marriage. After 7 years and 3 miscarriages, it remained empty, a shrine to dreams that refused to become reality. I used my key slipping off my heels to walk silently across the marble floors. The house felt different, not just quiet, but occupied by strangers. My skin prickled with the sensation of being an intruder in my own home. That's when I heard their voices. "Christopher insisted this room gets the most morning light," came Rebecca's familiar tone, sickeningly sweet. My sister-in-law, whom I'd loved like the sister I'd never had. "He wanted you to have the very best Diana." Diana. The name hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath and making my vision blur around the edges. "Really a place this special? I'm not sure I deserve it." The responding voice was young, breathy, calculated in its innocence. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain they would hear it. Through the partially open door, I could see Rebecca embracing a girl who couldn't be older than 22, showing off a closet I didn't recognize, filled with clothes I'd never seen before. The girl was wearing a Givenchy blouse. Christopher had claimed he'd lost one exactly like it during a business trip to Miami last month. Seeing it on her body felt like being stabbed with a rusty knife. "Diana, what if your sister-in-law comes back unexpectedly?" the girl asked, and I noticed how her eyes gleamed with greed, even as she feigned concern. Rebecca's laugh was like breaking glass. "That barren cow. She has no real place in this family anymore. She's nothing but a well-dressed checkbook." The words hit me with such force that I had to grip the wall to keep from falling. Rebecca, sweet Rebecca, whom I'd helped through college, whose wedding I'd paid for, whose career I'd launched with a single phone call, thought of me as livestock. Useful, but ultimately disposable. "Christopher says once you get pregnant, he'll file for divorce immediately." Everything will be yours then. I don't remember making the decision to run. One moment, I was frozen against the wall, listening to them plan my destruction, and the next, I was stumbling down the stairs, gasping for air like a drowning woman. I made it to the powder room just in time to vomit my body, rejecting the reality I just witnessed. 7 years. 7 years of loving a man who saw me as an obstacle to overcome. 7 years of treating his sister like family while she plotted my downfall. 7 years of believing that love and loyalty were reciprocal forces in the universe. I was such a fool. My phone buzzed. Dad! I stared at his name on the screen, unable to imagine explaining this to him. Harrison Sterling had built an empire on trust and handshake deals. How could I tell him that his son-in-law, the man he'd welcomed into our family, given access to our business, trusted with our legacy, was stealing from us in every way that mattered? Helena, where are you? His voice was unusually urgent. At home? I whispered, surprised by how normal I sounded. Good. We've detected some irregularities in Blackwood Construction's finances. Christopher has been moving money to offshore accounts. I need you to keep your eyes open. I looked toward the stairs, where I could still hear Rebecca's voice poisoning that young girl against me. Dad, I think keeping my eyes open is exactly what I should have been doing all along. After hanging up, I sat in that powder room for what felt like hours, staring at my reflection in the gilt-framed mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, broken. When had I become so fragile? When had I started expecting so little from the people I loved? The sound of a car in the driveway jolted me back to awareness. Christopher was home. I heard Rebecca's voice suddenly sharp with panic and the scrambling of feet upstairs. By the time I emerged from the powder room, the house was silent again. I found Christopher in his study, looking perfectly composed. He glanced up from his laptop with a smile that once made my heart race and now made my stomach turn. Darling, you're back early. How was Paris? Productive? I said, studying his face for signs of guilt. There were none. He was either an exceptional actor or genuinely believed he'd done nothing wrong. Christopher, is there anything you want to tell me? His smile flickered for just a moment. What do you mean? About the house, about your day, about anything at all? He closed his laptop and stood approaching me with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his welcome. Helena, you seem upset. Are you feeling all right? The concern in his voice was so perfectly calibrated that I almost believed it. Almost let myself think I'd imagined the entire scene upstairs. But then, I smelled that floral perfume I'd noticed when I first entered the house. It clung to him like evidence. I'm fine, I said, stepping back when he tried to embrace me. Just tired from the flight. That night, I lay awake, listening to Christopher's steady breathing, wondering how many lies could fit in the space between two people who'd once shared everything. I thought about the woman upstairs, young and eager and pregnant with possibility. I thought about Rebecca's voice dripping with contempt as she planned my replacement. Most of all, I thought about the woman I used to be before the miscarriages, before the growing distance between Christopher and me, before I learned that love could be conditional and family could be temporary. I had a choice to make. I could confront them, demand explanations, try to save a marriage that was already dead, or I could do something I'd never done before in my entire life. I could fight back. The next morning, Christopher left for work with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to be home early for dinner. I watched him go, noting how he avoided my eyes, how his hands shook slightly as he gathered his briefcase. Even his lies were becoming careless. I called in sick to Sterling Holdings for the first time in years. The excuse felt appropriate. I was sick, just not in the way my assistant assumed. I was sick with the knowledge that my life had been built on foundations of sand, and now the tide was coming in. Sarah Chen arrived within an hour of my call. My college roommate had become one of New York's most formidable attorneys, and she took one look at my face before pouring herself a coffee and settling in for what she clearly knew would be a long conversation. Tell me everything, she said simply. So I did. Every word, every gesture, every moment of my discovery the night before. As I spoke, I watched Sarah's expression shift from concern to fury to something harder and more focused. Helena, she said when I finished, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about an affair. If Christopher is moving money offshore while planning to divorce you, this is financial fraud on a massive scale. The word fraud hung between us like a blade. I'd been thinking in terms of betrayal of broken hearts and damaged trust. Sarah was thinking like a lawyer seeing patterns and strategies where I saw only pain. What do I do? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. First, we gather evidence. Then we protect your assets. Then we destroy him. Her voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing dinner plans. Sarah, I can't. Yes, you can. She leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. Helena, you're not just Christopher's victim here. You're the daughter of Harrison Sterling. You have resources, connections, and intelligence. The question is, are you going to use them? I thought about the woman upstairs trying on clothes bought with money that should have been ours. I thought about Rebecca's laughter as she called me barren. I thought about Christopher's casual dismissal of our marriage as if 7 years could be erased with paperwork and good timing. Yes, I said and meant it. But I don't want to become someone I can't live with. Sarah smiled, but it wasn't a comforting expression. Helena, honey, the person you've been living with is about to disappear anyway. The question is, who do you want to become instead? We started with the obvious targets. 6 American Express black cards, all backed by Sterling Holdings credit, and all currently funding my in-laws' extravagant lifestyle. Christopher's card, Rebecca's card, his parents' cards, even one for his worthless brother Marcus. Together, they represented nearly $1 million in annual spending that I'd been subsidizing without question. The mobile banking app made it almost criminally easy. A few taps, some biometric confirmation, and suddenly 6 accounts with unlimited spending power became 6 pieces of useless plastic. I felt a savage satisfaction as I watched the confirmations appear on my screen. My phone rang within minutes. Rebecca's name appeared and I let it go to voicemail. Then Christopher called, then his mother. I ignored them all, feeling a strange sense of power in my silence. They'll figure out it was you, Sarah warned. Let them. I want them to know. I was surprised by the hardness in my own voice. I want them to understand that their free ride just ended. But even as I said it, I felt a tremor of uncertainty. Was this justice, or simply revenge? Was I protecting myself, or becoming someone cruel and calculating? The questions followed me through the rest of the day, unanswered and uncomfortable. Sarah left me with a list of tasks. Change all passwords, document everything, start building a case. I approached each item methodically, but my hands shook as I worked. This felt like dismantling my own life piece by piece. That evening, Christopher came home with flowers, roses, my favorite, and a bottle of wine. His smile was strained, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. Helena, darling, we need to talk. Do we? I accepted the flowers, but made no move to put them in water. My cards aren't working. There seems to be some kind of system error. He was watching my face carefully, looking for tells. How strange. Have you called the bank? They said the accounts were frozen by the primary cardholder. His voice was steady, but I caught the flash of anger in his eyes. Well, that would be me, I said pleasantly. Perhaps there's been some unusual activity that triggered their security protocols. We stared at each other across our kitchen island, 7 years of marriage reduced to this moment of mutual recognition. He knew that I knew. I knew that he knew I knew. We were past the point of pretending otherwise. Helena, what do you want? The question hung between us, loaded with implications. What did I want? The truth, an apology, my old life back, or something else entirely? Something I was only beginning to understand. I want you to be honest with me for once, I said finally. Christopher set down his wineglass and rubbed his face with both hands. For a moment, he looked older, tired, almost vulnerable. "The company is failing," he said quietly. "Has been for 2 years. I've been moving money around trying to keep us afloat, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Moving whose money, Christopher?" "Yours. Ours. I know it was wrong, but I thought if I could just buy some time—" "And Diana, was she part of buying time too?" His face went white. "How did you—" "I saw her. In our house. In the room that was supposed to be our child's nursery." My voice cracked on the last word, years of grief and disappointment forcing their way to the surface. Christopher's composure finally broke. "Helena, please let me explain. Explain that you've been planning to divorce me. That you and Rebecca think I'm nothing but a well-dressed checkbook. That you've been stealing from my family while sleeping with a girl young enough to be your daughter." He recoiled as if I'd struck him. "It's not like that. The situation is complicated." "No, Christopher. It's actually very simple." I stood up, surprised by how steady I felt. "You chose to betray me in every way that matters. Now, I'm choosing to protect myself." "Helena, please. If you destroy me, you destroy yourself too. We're connected financially, legally, in every way that matters." I looked at him, really looked for perhaps the first time in years. When had he become so desperate, so calculating? When had the man I'd fallen in love with been replaced by this stranger who spoke of our marriage in terms of financial exposure? "Then maybe it's time to cut those connections," I said. What followed was 3 weeks of careful warfare. Sarah helped me hire a forensic accountant who uncovered the true scope of Christopher's embezzlement, not just the offshore transfers my father had detected, but years of systematic theft hidden in construction contracts, inflated material costs, and phantom employees. The numbers were staggering. Over the course of 3 years, Christopher had stolen nearly $60 million from various accounts connected to Sterling Holdings. The money had been laundered through shell companies moved offshore and ultimately deposited in accounts controlled by a name that made my blood run cold, Marcus Donovan. I knew that name. Every person in New York real estate knew that name. Marcus Donovan was my father's oldest rival, a man who'd built his empire on the ruins of other people's dreams. If Christopher was working with Donovan— "This isn't just embezzlement," Sarah said, spreading the financial records across her conference table. "This is corporate espionage on a massive scale." I stared at the documents, trying to process their implications. "How long do you think this has been planned?" "Years, probably. Maybe from the beginning of your marriage." The words hit me like a physical blow. Had Christopher ever loved me? Or had I simply been a target from the start? Had our entire relationship been nothing but an elaborate con? Sarah must have seen something in my face because she reached across the table and gripped my hand. "Helena, you can't think like that. Not now. We need to focus on stopping them." But I couldn't focus. The room seemed to be tilting around me, and I felt that familiar sensation of drowning that I'd experienced during my darkest moments after the miscarriages. Everything I'd believed about my life, my marriage, my judgment was crumbling beneath me. "I need air," I managed and fled to Sarah's balcony. The October wind cut through my jacket as I gripped the railing, trying to remember how to breathe. Below me, Manhattan stretched in all directions, millions of people living their lives without knowing that my world was ending. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. My phone buzzed. Christopher again. I'd been ignoring his calls for days, but something made me answer this time. "Helena, thank God. We need to talk." "Do we?" "I think your actions have been quite clear. You don't understand the whole situation. I'm in trouble, serious trouble. If you don't help me, we'll both go down." The desperation in his voice was new. Gone was the careful control, the calculated charm. This was a man backed into a corner. "What kind of trouble, Christopher?" "Meet me tonight, alone. I'll explain everything." Every instinct told me to refuse to hang up, to let Sarah handle everything through lawyers and courts. But beneath my fear and anger was something else, a need to understand how completely I'd been deceived. "Where?" "Our house, 8 o'clock. The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone and wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I arrived at the house 10 minutes early, parking down the street and watching for any signs of movement. The October evening was crisp and clear, with the kind of light that made everything look sharp and unforgiving. Christopher's car was in the driveway, but I could see other vehicles parked nearby, cars I didn't recognize with dark windows and an air of menace that made my skin crawl. I called Sarah. "Something's wrong? There are other people here?" "Helena, get out of there, now. I need to know what he's planning. You need to stay alive. Whatever Christopher wants to tell you, it can wait." But even as she spoke, I was getting out of my car and walking toward the house. I had to know. I had to understand how my life had become something I no longer recognized. The front door was unlocked. I slipped inside immediately, noticing the changes: furniture moved, pictures removed, as if someone was preparing for a quick departure. I found Christopher in his study, but he wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize sat in the chair across from his desk, and something about his presence made every nerve in my body scream danger. "Helena!" Christopher stood quickly, his face pale with what looked like genuine fear. "You shouldn't have come, but I'm glad she did," said the stranger, rising with predatory grace. He was perhaps 60, impeccably dressed with silver hair and eyes like winter ice. "Mrs. Sterling, I presume I'm Marcus Donovan." The name hung in the air like a curse. This was the man who'd been pulling Christopher's strings, who'd orchestrated the theft of millions from my family. Seeing him in my home felt like a violation so profound, I could barely process it. "Mr. Donovan." I managed, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "I've heard so much about you." His smile was razor sharp. "And I about you. Your husband has been most informative about Sterling Holdings operations." Christopher flinched at the word husband, and I realized with growing horror that this meeting wasn't what I'd expected. I wasn't here to get explanations from Christopher. I was here because Donovan wanted to deal with me directly. "What do you want?" I asked. Cooperation," Donovan said simply. "Your husband has gotten himself into quite a predicament. He owes me a substantial amount of money he doesn't have, but you do. I'm not responsible for Christopher's debts, but you are. You see, the money he borrowed was secured against Sterling Holdings assets. Your signature is on several documents, though I suspect you don't remember signing them." My blood turned to ice. "That's impossible!" Donovan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. Even from across the room, I could see my signature on the bottom of each page, but I had no memory of signing anything like this. "Forgery," I said. Prove it," Donovan replied calmly. "In the meantime, these documents give me certain rights regarding Sterling Holdings assets. Rights I'm prepared to exercise unless we can reach an accommodation." "What kind of accommodation?" "Simple. You transfer 30% of Sterling Holdings to companies I control, and I forgive your husband's debts. Everyone wins. Except my family." "Your family will survive. The alternative?" He let the threat hang unfinished. I looked at Christopher, who was staring at the floor like a man awaiting execution. "How long have you been planning this, Helena, I swear to you it wasn't supposed to go this far. I just needed a loan." "How long, Christopher?" Donovan answered for him. 3 years. Though to be fair, your husband was remarkably naive about the terms of our arrangement." 3 years. Our entire marriage had been a lie for 3 years. I felt something break inside me, not just my heart, but something deeper. Some fundamental trust in the world that I would never get back. "I need time to think," I said. "Of course, but don't take too long. I find that delayed decisions often become impossible ones." As I turned to leave, Donovan called after me. "Oh, Mrs. Sterling, you might want to ask your father about the Clearwater Mine incident. I think you'll find that conversation illuminating." I drove aimlessly through Manhattan for hours after leaving the house, Donovan's words echoing in my mind. The Clearwater Mine incident. I'd never heard of it, but something about the way he'd said it with such casual malice made my skin crawl. Finally, I called my father. "Dad, I need to see you. Tonight. Helena, what's wrong? Everything. Dad, everything is wrong. An hour later, I was sitting in my father's study in the family estate, watching him pour himself a scotch with hands that shook slightly. He looked older than his 68 years, and for the first time in my life, I saw him as fragile. Tell me about Clearwater Mine, I said without preamble. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Scotch spread across the Persian rug like blood, and my father's face went white as paper. Where did you hear that name? Marcus Donovan mentioned it. He said I should ask you about some kind of incident. My father aged 10 years in front of my eyes. He sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his decades. Helena, there are things in my past things I've never told you, because I hoped they would stay buried. What kind of things? He was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 23 years ago, I was a partner in a mining operation in West Virginia. Clearwater Mine. It was supposed to be a simple investment. I provided capital. Donovan provided expertise and management. My stomach began to churn. What happened? There was an accident, a collapse. 12 men died, including... He paused, swallowing hard. Including your Uncle James. I'd never known my father had had a brother. In all my years, he'd never mentioned James, never spoken of lost family. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. How? Safety violations. Corners cut to maximize profit. I didn't know, I swear to you, Helena. I had no idea Donovan was operating the mine so carelessly. I was just a silent partner reviewing financial reports from my office in New York. But I was responsible. I signed off on the operating procedures without really understanding them. I trusted Donovan to handle the details. His voice broke. My brother died because I was lazy and trusting and more concerned with profits than safety. The weight of this revelation settled over me like a shroud. My father, my hero, my moral compass had been complicit in a tragedy that killed 12 men, including his own brother. Dad, what happened after the accident? Investigation. Hearings. The official report blamed equipment failure and operator error. The families of the victims were given modest settlements. He looked up at me with haunted eyes. I tried to give them more, but Donovan said it would look like an admission of guilt. And now Donovan is using this against our family? He has documents, evidence that I knew more about the safety violations than I admitted publicly. Whether it's true or not, he shrugged helplessly. It would destroy everything we've built. I sat in silence, trying to process this new understanding of my father, my family, my entire history. Everything I'd believed about the sterling legacy was built on lies and buried guilt. Helena, my father said quietly. I've lived with this secret for 23 years. It's eaten away at me piece by piece. I won't let it destroy you too. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time to pay for what I did. Maybe it's time for the truth to come out. I looked at this man who'd raised me, taught me about business and integrity and doing the right thing, and realized he'd been living a lie longer than I'd been alive. But beneath my shock and disappointment was something else, a strange kind of relief. If my father could carry such a burden and still function, still build something meaningful with his life, then maybe I could survive the collapse of my own carefully constructed world. No, I said firmly. We're not going to let Donovan destroy us with the past. We're going to fight back. My father looked at me with something that might have been pride. Helena, he's dangerous. If we move against him, then we better make sure we win. What happened over the next month transformed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I learned things about myself I'd never suspected: that I could be ruthless when necessary, that I could make decisions that affected hundreds of people without flinching, that I could smile and lie and manipulate when the stakes were high enough. I also learned that revenge is a dish best served systematically with attention to detail and a complete understanding of your opponent's weaknesses. Sarah became my general in this war, mapping out legal strategies and gathering intelligence on Donovan's operations. We discovered that his empire was more fragile than it appeared, built on leverage and intimidation, rather than solid foundations. He's been using the same playbook for decades, Sarah explained, showing me a thick file of lawsuits and bankrupted companies. Find a vulnerable target, compromise them somehow, then bleed them dry. The beauty is that his victims are usually too ashamed or too scared to fight back. But we're going to fight back. We're going to do more than that. We're going to end him. The first phase of our counterattack was to systematically expose Christopher's embezzlement to the authorities. Sarah had contacts in the FBI's white-collar crime division, and within days, federal agents were seizing Blackwood Construction's files and freezing accounts. Christopher called me panicked and desperate. "Helena, they're destroying everything. 20 years of work gone. You have to help me." "Why would I help you, Christopher? You stole from my family. You betrayed our marriage. You conspired with a man who killed my uncle. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was desperate." "No, you were greedy. There's a difference." But even as I said the words, part of me recognized the pain in his voice. The Christopher I'd fallen in love with was still there, buried beneath years of bad decisions and moral compromises. That recognition didn't change what I had to do, but it made it harder. The second phase was more delicate. Diana Morrison, the young woman who'd been planted in my home, had disappeared after Christopher's arrest. But Sarah's investigators found her living under an assumed name in Philadelphia, working as a waitress and attending community college. I went to see her myself against Sarah's advice. "Mrs. Sterling." Diana looked genuinely shocked when I appeared at her tiny apartment. She was thinner than I remembered, her face drawn with stress and fear. "Hello, Diana. We need to talk." She invited me in, though her hands shook as she poured coffee. The apartment was sparse but clean, furnished with second-hand pieces and decorated with textbooks on social work. "I know you must hate me," she said without looking up. "I don't hate you. I understand you." That got her attention. "What do you mean?" I understand what it's like to be young and scared and manipulated by powerful men who make promises they never intend to keep." Diana's composure cracked and tears began to flow. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Mr. Donovan said you were cold and heartless, that your family had destroyed his life. He made it sound like justice." "Tell me everything, Diana, all of it." So she did. The whole sordid story of how Donovan had recruited her, trained her, used her family's financial problems to ensure her cooperation. How she'd genuinely come to care for Christopher, even knowing their relationship was built on lies. How terrified she'd been when she realized she was pregnant. Pregnant. My blood went cold. "I lost it," she said quickly. "Miscarried at 8 weeks. I was so scared to tell Mr. Donovan because he was counting on that baby to what? To give Christopher motivation to move faster, to make the divorce more urgent and complicated." I sat in silence, processing this information. Donovan hadn't just been stealing money, he'd been orchestrating an elaborate psychological manipulation designed to destroy my marriage and my family's business. "Diana, I'm going to make you an offer. You help me bring down Donovan, and I'll help you start over. Clean slate, new identity, education paid for." "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to tell the truth. All of it. To the FBI, to the press, to anyone who will listen." She agreed, though I could see the fear in her eyes. Donovan had made it clear what happened to people who crossed him. The press conference was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November. I'd spent weeks preparing, working with Sarah and a crisis management firm to craft a narrative that would expose Donovan while protecting my family's remaining secrets. But the night before, everything changed. I was reviewing my notes when my phone rang. Unknown number. "Helena Sterling." "Yes." "This is Agent Patricia Walsh, FBI. Mrs. Sterling, we need to talk immediately. Your life may be in danger." An hour later, I was sitting in a secure conference room at the FBI field office, surrounded by agents and listening to the most terrifying words I'd ever heard. "Marcus Donovan ordered a contract on your life," Agent Walsh said without preamble. We intercepted communications between him and a known assassin. The hit is scheduled for tonight. The room seemed to tilt around me. Tonight, we believe he's trying to eliminate you before tomorrow's press conference. Mrs. Sterling, we need to place you in protective custody immediately. What about my father, Diana Morrison, anyone else who might be targeted? Already arranged. Your father is at a safe house, and Ms. Morrison is under federal protection. I thought about hiding, letting the authorities handle everything, while I cowered in some anonymous hotel room. But then I thought about my Uncle James dying in a mine collapse because men like Donovan put profits before human life. I thought about all the families Donovan had destroyed over the decades, all the people too frightened or powerless to fight back. No, I said. Agent Walsh looked surprised. Mrs. Sterling, I don't think you understand the severity. I understand perfectly. But if I run now, Donovan wins. He'll disappear, regroup, and start over somewhere else. How many more people will he destroy while we're chasing shadows? What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we use me as bait. What followed was 12 hours of the most intense fear I'd ever experienced. The FBI wired me for sound and video, surrounded the press conference location with undercover agents, and briefed me on every possible scenario. But as I stood at that podium the next morning, looking out at a room full of reporters and cameras, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: clarity. My name is Helena Sterling. I began, and I'm here to tell you about a man who has spent decades destroying families and covering up his crimes. I told them everything: the embezzlement, the manipulation, the mining disaster, the threats. I played recordings of Donovan's conversations, showed documents proving his involvement in multiple conspiracies, and presented evidence of his attempts to have me killed. Halfway through my presentation, Agent Walsh stepped to a microphone at the side of the room. Marcus Donovan, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and violations of federal securities law. I turned to see Donovan being led away in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. As he passed the podium, he looked directly at me. This isn't over, Helena. Your family's sins will find you eventually. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd learned something valuable over the past few months. The truth is more powerful than any threat, and sometimes the only way to heal is to stop hiding from the light. The trials took 2 years. Donovan was eventually sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, his assets seized and distributed to his victims. Christopher received 8 years for his role in the conspiracy, though his cooperation with federal investigators earned him a reduced sentence. I attended every day of Christopher's trial, not out of love or loyalty, but because I needed to understand how completely I'd been deceived. Watching him testify about our marriage, about his motivations and regrets, was like attending the funeral of someone I'd once been. On the day of his sentencing, he asked to speak to me privately. Helena, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. No, you don't. But I need you to know that I did love you. At the beginning, before everything got so complicated, I genuinely loved you. I looked at this man I'd once planned to grow old with, now dressed in an orange jumpsuit and facing years in prison, and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. I believe you, Christopher. But love isn't enough. Is it love without trust, without honesty, without respect? It's just sentiment. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. Will you ever be able to forgive me? I already have, I said, surprising both of us. Not for your sake, but for mine. I won't let your choices poison the rest of my life. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not happy exactly, but free. Free from the weight of lies, from the burden of secrets, from the exhausting work of pretending my life was something it wasn't. The Sterling Foundation was created 1 year after Donovan's conviction. Using the recovered assets from his criminal enterprises, we established programs for corporate whistleblowers, support for mining safety initiatives, and legal aid for families affected by white-collar crime. Diana Morrison became our first program director. She'd completed her degree in social work and proved to have a remarkable talent for helping people navigate complex legal and financial situations. Do you ever regret it? she asked me one day as we reviewed applications for assistance grants. Regret what? Fighting back. It cost you everything: your marriage, your privacy, your peace of mind. I considered the question seriously. The past 3 years had been the most difficult of my life, but they'd also been the most honest. I'd learned who I really was when everything I thought I knew about myself was stripped away. No, I said finally. I don't regret it. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. My father never fully recovered from the public revelation of his role in the mining disaster. The guilt he'd carried for 23 years, combined with the stress of the trials and media attention, aged him rapidly. He stepped down as chairman of Sterling Holdings and spent his remaining years working quietly with victims' families, trying to make amends for his long-ago mistakes. He died peacefully in his sleep 2 years after Donovan's conviction. His final words to me were an apology I told him he didn't need to make. It's been 5 years since that October night when I discovered my husband's betrayal. I'm 38 now, unmarried, running a foundation that helps people rebuild their lives after corporate crimes destroy them. I live alone in a brownstone in the village, far from the Hamptons estate, where I learned that nothing is permanent and no one is who they appear to be. I have a small circle of friends who knew me before I became known as that woman who brought down Marcus Donovan. I date occasionally, though I'm careful not to confuse companionship with the kind of trust I once gave so freely. People ask me if I'm bitter, if I regret not having children, if I ever wonder what my life would have been like if I'd never discovered Christopher's affair. The answer is complicated. I am not bitter, though I am sadder and more cautious than I once was. I do regret not having children, but I've learned that there are many ways to nurture and protect the vulnerable. And as for wondering about alternative lives, I've stopped playing that game. The life I have is the one I chose moment by moment, decision by decision, when everything familiar was taken away. What I know now is this betrayal reveals not just the character of those who betray us, but our own character as well. We can choose to be victims or survivors, to be broken by our losses or strengthened by them. I chose to survive. I chose to fight back. I chose to use my pain as fuel for something larger than my own grievances. Was it worth it? That's not the right question. The right question is, when faced with the choice between comfortable lies and difficult truths, what kind of person do you choose to be? I chose to be someone who could live with herself. In the end, that's all any of us can do. The rest is just details. This memoir was written 5 years after the events described, with all legal proceedings concluded and all individuals involved either deceased, imprisoned, or otherwise unable to pursue retribution. Some names have been changed to protect the privacy of survivors.